I'm thrilled to welcome you to the Corning Museum of Glass Amphitheater, and you have picked a really special night to come. So we always try and do something a little bit more elaborate for our 6 p.m. late demo, and tonight is certainly no exception. I'm very thrilled to introduce you to our team. We have a master glassblower joining us from Muranese, Italy. So I'd love to introduce you. This is Davide Salvadore. And he has brought quite a team with him. So right there in the center of our studio, gathering glass from the melting furnace, this is Marco. All right, and so they've already begun. They've collected glass out of the furnace. If you're watching glass for the first time or joining us on our live stream, the temperature of that glass is 2,120 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's literally the temperature of lava when it comes out of a volcano. And that glass is about the consistency of honey. And so to carry on with our introductions, though, we've got more of the team assembled over here. We've got Sam, we have Ricardo, Pino, and Pietro. So welcoming them to the amphitheater as well. On the other side of the room, we're being helped out by Jamie, Chris, Jeff, and Carl. So quite the assemblage. Yeah. My name is Meg. I'm going to be here to explain things to you. So if at any point you've got questions about what's going on here on the hot shop floor, or maybe something that you've seen in the museum tonight, I'd be very happy to share whatever knowledge I have with you. But you can always tell when it's a special demo, too. When you look around this amphitheater, you check out what's going up on the mezzanine, and you see all of those people peering down over the edges. These are folks who have been taking a class with Davide across the street at our studio. So here at the Corning Museum of Glass, we've got an amazing teaching facility. We bring in glass instructors and students from all over the planet, and they come over to watch these special demonstrations. Getting to work in this studio, I think it's like getting to go to Disneyland. Everything that you could possibly, better than Disneyland, exactly. Everything you could possibly look for and to help you make the art that you want to create. We do our best to give the artist access. So the object that we're making tonight is going to be big, it's going to be impressive, and it's a style of glassmaking that's going to involve Muranese and an encalmo color technique. So does anyone know what those terms mean? Everyone up there is probably raising their hands because they've been practicing all week long. But you're going to see it unfold. But the Muranese technique, that's a way that we create pretty intricate patterns in glass. It's composed of many small pieces that are fused together and then rolled up around the circumference of a bubble. So you'll see this happen soon. Encalmo is when we bring two different kind of hemispheres or color patterns together, kind of like two halves of a globe, or like the old Tylenol capsules where you see the white side and the red side, but bringing the kind of division of color into a single bubble of glass that then will be inflated into a larger vase. So ultimately, we're making a great big vase tonight, but there's going to be a lot of very intricate work going on in front of you. And also, some of that work has been happening already today. We've already begun some of those steps and processes. All right, so they've inflated a small bubble inside this hot glass. And it looks like we're going to be picking up the Muranese shortly. So some of the other pieces of equipment I want to introduce you to. We started with the melting furnace. There they go, gathering again. Let's show you an animation of what happens when we gather glass out of that furnace. We've got a great animation we can show you. So inside that big furnace, there's a hemispheric pot. This one holds 1,000 pounds of liquid glass. But if you were to imagine having a bowl of room temperature table honey in front of you, dipping a chopstick down into that bowl and twirling and trying to wind out as much honey as possible, that's very similar to the move that they go through with that blowpipe and that pot of liquid glass. And so they picked up a little bit of an impurity in that glass, and you could just snip that free. You can tell you're working with a great caliber of glass worker when they want to make sure that the consistency of that glass is absolutely perfect. We don't want to see any bubbles. We don't want to see any crumbs or bricks that might have come loose from our furnace in there. And so they snip that away while it's still very, very hot, and then bring it back to a nice round, smooth, and symmetrical shape. When the glass is at this temperature, it's very soft to cut through. It feels spongy, a little bit like you're cutting through an orange peel. But I think the trickiest part about cutting into that glass is how hot the glass is itself. Our shears, your hand has to be within inches of that 2,000 degree material, and so you want to be very swift when you go to trim it. You might often see the gaffer or glassblower dip their hand into a bucket of water before they pick up that tool, just to kind of give them a little bit of a glove, a little bit of a water glove or buffer before they get exposed to that heat. Now, another piece of equipment I want to introduce you to is this one over here. This is what we call the garage. It looks kind of boring from your side of the audience, but if you do a lap around our mezzanine, if you want to stretch your legs and look at it from this direction, see our side, I think it looks like a medieval rabbit hutch. It's got little doors on the front side. And so inside our garage, it's about 1,000 degrees, and that's where we have our plate of Muranese stored. And so the color patterning, we've already prepared that, and it's waiting. And it's going to get rolled up around this bubble. Now, they did some pretty fancy shaping there to get that bubble back on center. They want to evenly distribute that glass all the way around the circumference. You know, anytime you blow air through the pipe, the bubble of air is going to be centered on the steel, even if your glass is not. So if your glass sags off to one side, if it falls with gravity, and then you inflate the bubble, what you end up with is a bubble that's got uneven wall thickness. It might be thicker on one side and thinner on the other. And so then when you try and turn it and inflate that into a nice vase, it feels like you're driving with a flat tire. It feels very wonky. You feel that asymmetry, and it's really difficult to recover. So even at this early stage, we want to make sure that our bubble is as centered as we can possibly get it. Tools to help us do that, things like gravity, things like centrifugal force, and of course, this great heat. Now we're working at a reheating furnace as well. And the big difference between our reheating furnace and our melting furnace is that there's no liquid glass in the reheating furnace. It's a great big empty barrel of heat, but it's at a very similar temperature, just north of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So he's got a couple different tools that he's also been using to help shape that glass. Block is one of them. So it's got one over here. It's this wooden scoop shape tool. And so this is really fantastic. People scratch their heads when they see us use wooden tools against such hot, hot glass. But it was made from green cherry wood, and then it's been soaked in water its entire life. So this is, completely waterlogged. And there's something called the Lindenfrost effect. If you've ever dripped a bead of water in an extremely hot skillet and just watched that water dance around, well, what happens when water touches a surface that's way over the boiling temperature, a barrier of steam is created. So in that situation, your bead of water is dancing on steam. Well, similarly, when we use a wet wooden tool, as soon as the glass gets close, a layer of steam is created, and so the glass just glides inside this block. It's a really great way to shape the material. So there he goes, reaching for it again. And so when these tools are used by professionals, they'll last for months and months. Now, they do make student blocks. If you're learning to blow glass, you tend to overdo everything. You let the glass get too cold. You let the block get too dry. Sometimes it ignites. And so your student blocks, they eventually burn down, and they make them with a lot more mass on the bottom here, and so those tools can last a lot longer. But again, one of my favorite things about working here in the amphitheater is the quality of the equipment that only professionals get to work up here. And so it's really a dreamy place to work. All right, so right now we're at a stage where we're letting that bubble cool down. We're waiting for it to reach a consistency where it's about as hard as the windows between us. When the glass reaches that temperature, they can dip it back into the melting furnace, and it can support another layer of clear liquid glass on top. So, this waiting is really important. If we go too soon, when we dip back into that melting furnace, the heat that we expose the glass to could squish the bubble. And so then we'd lose that radial symmetry. Even worse, if we were still quite hot and we try and gather glass, the whole thing could kind of goober and blob back into the tank. And so we'd have to start again. And so the best way to reach that temperature is just to wait. We're looking for movement in the glass. He's continuously turning it. And so timing is everything. This process of collecting glass out of the furnace, it's described as gathering. And often when a glassblower describes the scale of an object to another glassblower, they're not going to say, I'm going to make a vase and it's going to be 22 inches tall and 18 inches in diameter. They would say instead, I'm going to make a vase and it's going to be 4 gathers or 5 gathers. And they're describing how many times they have to dip that blowpipe into the liquid glass to collect. So adding some air pressure into that pipe too, that helps him determine the viscosity or the consistency of the glass. If he blows air in and he doesn't feel the glass expand, you can tell it's ready. All right, now right over here to the bench. And now come over here on this side of the glass. If at any point you do have questions, you're definitely invited to raise your hand, shout them out nice and loud, and I'll do my best to answer for you. That I believe is the third gather. So yeah, they started out with a very small bubble. I think there was a second one in there while I was chit-chatting away. So this is gather number 3. And tonight, because we're making this in Calmo technique, it's going to be this is to create only half of the bubble. So I'd say one hemisphere of the bubble we want to create. So this is the section we're going to apply all the Murini. So Chris has got that going over there. We've got a plate and a pair of forks over here at the reheating furnace. And so to make the Murini, what they would start out with is a chunk of concentrated glass color. And then you can coat that in a layer of clear and stretch it out, a lot like pulling taffy. And so then what you would end up with is a cane of glass. So it's like a long stick of glass that's the diameter of a pencil. It can be about the length of the stage here. You can cut that into smaller segments then. You can rebundle it to make a fancy pattern with your glass. You can stretch it again and make an even more elaborate cane. And then from there, you can cut that down into small sections, which is called Murinis. Yeah, so again, very similar to candy making. Make these little tiny pieces or discs of glass. So if we can get a view of what's going on the bench over there, you might be able to see the Murini plate. With this many helpers in the room, it's hard to get the cameras up nice and close. But there you go. You can see our Murini pattern. And so in this situation, it looks like we have lots of different colored canes. We have them overlaid with different colors and then stretched then into those long sticks of color, broken up into small segments, and then arranged in that pattern on the plate. Do we typically have this many people in one place to build one vase? It depends on how impressive that vase is going to be, and I hope this gives you an indication of how impressive the vase is going to be that you see come together tonight. You can work alone as a glass blower. You can make very simple things, but you are really limited in terms of the scale and the complexity that you bring to your work. When you have a team of so many skilled glass workers, there's really no limit to what you can do. All right, so Chris is heating up the plate of Murini. When they're happy with the temperature of that, when they see that those little pieces of glass have fully fused together, then we're going to wrap that plate of colored glass around the circumference of our bubble. So kind of like putting a little jacket or coat on our clear glass. We'll wind this up around it. And so it's no easy task to get the temperature just right. These little pieces of glass, we want to make sure that they stick together, that they hold together, and that they're pliable. It needs to peel up off that plate and wrap around the glass. But we don't want it to heat to the point that they soften, that they really melt into the surface there. We don't want them to stick to the plate. They could pick up some, what we call kiln wash, pick up some impurities from that plate. And so it needs to be just the right temperature where, it wants to. Yeah, he's dipping right back into that furnace that has the liquid glass, getting another gather. And we call this a strip gather. This is pretty awesome. They let the excess glass just run off the tip. That's one of the ways we can control the amount of material that we collect. That if you dip into that melting furnace with a large mass, just the amount of surface area, that's going to determine to a great degree how much more glass you gather. And so by coming right out and letting some of it fall away, you can decrease that amount. How heavy is that piece of glass that he's got right there? So I would guess maybe 10, 15 pounds of glass right there. And you think about something that is 10, 15 pounds, that doesn't sound like a big deal, right? That's like a little baby, You could hold that, no problem. Except that this is on the end of a pipe. And that pipe that he's working with, that's a pretty big pipe. I think that's our maybe 15.5-pound blowpipe. Okay, so now we're talking about 10 pounds of glass on the end of what would feel like a 15.5-pound steel shovel. And so if you think about that, you've got a precious object, you want to keep it nice and safe, you get a good grip on your shovel handle. If you spread your hands out along the length of it, your little precious glass baby is safe, right? except that it's 2,000 degrees, so you don't want to have your hands spread out along that handle. You want to scoot one hand way back. And so then that hand is like the fulcrum of a lever. That makes that piece of glass feel so much heavier. Okay, but if I'm thinking about my precious glass baby and I've got my hand way back, if I hold this hand upright and this hand pressing down, kind of counterweight, get a good stance, your 2,000 degree baby is safe, right? Except you have to keep it rotating. You know, gravity wants to dump that on the floor. So then you're having to use all these additional muscles in your hands, in your forearms, keep it constantly rotating. You don't have a good grip on it. And so what started out feeling like a little tiny baby now feels like a crazy teenager on the end of your blowpipe. It's really, really difficult to manage. You know, this turning motion that we do with the pipes, you know, anytime we're holding on to that, you know, we're rotating it. That has to be muscle memory. You have to be able to do that without thinking about it. When I was learning to blow glass in college, one of my first assignments from my instructor, you know, he said, go home, put down your other projects, maybe sit on the couch for a couple hours, put a movie on, but hold a broomstick. Just practice turning it. You know, you need that motion to be second nature. You know, and at this point it is. If you take any of these glass blowers out to dinner, chances are they'll pick up their cutlery and start rotating it. If you take them to go play billiards, they'll pick up their pool cues, they'll start rotating them. You know, that motion, it just happens without thinking about it. All right, now we're really starting to shape up our bubble. He's using a tool called a pie divider there to check the measurement. So this is a pretty fun tool if you are an art major and not a math major. I think it just is so fascinating. But the pie divider, it's this pair of calipers where on one end, I call it the Pac-Man end. It's got kind of a nice round opening. You know, that's what he's using to check the diameter of his bubble. On the opposite end of that tool, the great big wide end, that great big obtuse angle, that is going to tell him what the circumference needs to be to fit around the diameter of the bubble that he just measured. And so when we're talking about doing this Muranese roll-up, where we want to roll up this flat sheet of fused glass around our bubble, if your bubble matches the small end, the Pac-Man opening, and then the plate of glass matches that big obtuse angle end, you're going to have a beautiful connection point. Now it's a bit of a moving target though, because you know this soft bubble that we're working with, it's moving around. Yeah, so we're starting another bubble on the other bench. And so for this Incalmo technique, half of the vase is going to have this pattern. The other half, I believe, is going to be an overlay of a solid color of glass. And so one half will have the pattern, one half will be a solid color. And so that's what they're beginning over here. So kind of working efficiently, you know, having these teams all get busy together. Oh, there we go. Cooling off the handle of the blowpipe. People wonder if glass blowers have any nerve endings. You know, they see us working with this hot material and they start to fear for our safety. But the pipes we're working with, they're made of stainless steel. And if you're nerdy about stainless steel, it's stainless steel 309, but it's just a really poor conductor of heat. However, the bigger that piece of glass is that you have on the end, the more likely it is that the pipe will start to warm up deeper and deeper so you can cool it off. But look at that beautiful Muranese roll-up. All right. And so over the next couple minutes, what we want to do is make sure that that is fully fused onto the surface of our bubble. We're going to smooth away any texture. And where it kind of finishes and has the clear bubble still exposed on the tip, we're also going to be kind of squeezing that down and terminating the design where there's still pattern attached. That looks like we're going to adjust that little coat a little bit. You know, we want to make sure that that seam is just perfect, that it doesn't interrupt the pattern. Now, if they roll it up off that plate and there's any dust from the plate, that whisk broom just brushes it away. So I think it's a really lovely smell to smell the whisk broom burning. And I think if you visit hot shops, it's pretty funny to look at all the brooms, whether they're for glass that falls on the floor or glass that they brush at the bench, because all of the brooms are going to be burned. All right, so this table, it's called a Marver, M-A-R-V-E-R, and you're going to find one in just about every glass blowing studio, but it's a fantastic tool both to shape and cool the glass. And so here, rolling and rocking that Muranese pattern back and forth, bringing that tighter in on our clear glass bubble. And so at our marver here, it's made of steel. It's a couple inches thick on that great big slab of steel. But historically, marvers would have been made from marble. However, sometimes what we like to do is drip glass directly from our melting furnace onto that table, and that 2,000 degree temperature shock can actually crack marble. So steel is a preferred material now. And you can really see how gravity just keeps pulling that down toward the floor, but you can make some adjustments, do some shaping, flip it over, and then let it fall back on center. Now we've also got Marco over there helping to inflate the glass. And so by adding some air pressure from the inside, we can help that clear bubble expand to apply pressure from the inside, while Davide applies pressure from the outside. That is a beautiful pattern in the glass. And so, I mentioned earlier that this was made from Muranese, which were made from canes, which were made from chunks of glass color. And so we don't make the color ourselves here at the museum. We buy our color from a manufacturer. But the first ingredient you need is, of course, your clear glass. Does anyone know what the primary ingredient in clear glass is? You can shout it out. Silica, absolutely. I also heard sand, but, of course, silica being very refined sand. And we don't get our silica, we don't run to the beach, grab a shovel, dump it in our pickup truck, and drive it back to the museum. We like to get very refined silica. Ours is mined out of a mountain in Washington State. It comes from Lane Mountain. But silica all on its own has a very high melting temperature, around 4,000 degrees. So to lower the melting temperature and give it an ideal working temperature range for glass blowing, it needs a flux. So they add soda ash. But soda ash actually makes the glass soluble. So then to stabilize it, they add lime. So we call this soda lime glass, and that is literally the 3 ingredients, soda, lime, and glass. Now the colors, when the manufacturer starts out with that pot of liquid clear glass, they can add different metal oxides to create the different colors. Now my favorite color in glass is pink. I see some nice pink shirts out there. Who loves pink glass? A few of you, absolutely. Well, we've got expensive taste. If you want to make pink glass, you need to add gold chloride to turn it pink. And so we've also got lots of good examples here. This beautiful blue that's made by adding cobalt to clear glass. Who loves green glass? Beautiful bright green glass. Yeah, you've got cheap taste. You can add iron oxide to turn the glass green, which is actually rust. But you learn a lot about chemistry when you start paying attention to your glass colors. Manganese will create purple glass. Tin or titanium can create white glass. Fluorite can create your nice opaque colors. And lucky for us, again, we don't have to make those colors ourselves. When you buy them from a manufacturer, you know that every time they're going to be giving you a very consistent product. They're going to be dealing with the metals also when they're at their most dangerous. We don't necessarily want to be handling cadmium or tin or titanium or arsenic or things that could be poisonous. But by the time they're melted into glass, they're very inert. They're very stable. You might be thinking about a beautiful, colorful glass punch bowl at home. You might be worrying when you serve your beloved family in lead crystal glasses. You might be thinking, am I poisoning everyone that I care about? No, not at all. That glass is so stable. It is not leaching any of those metals out into whatever you're serving. You would die of alcohol poisoning about 700 years before you would ever die of heavy metal poisoning. All right, now we've made good progress. We've really started to smooth and fuse this Muranese pattern onto our bubble. And you can see it moving and falling and wiggling with gravity. So this is, again, a lot of glass at a very high temperature. And so this is probably the time in the process where it feels the heaviest. The softer that glass is, the more strength it takes to turn it and keep it centered. Now he makes this marvering process look really easy. In fact, everything that you see Davide do tonight, he's going to make it look way, way, way too easy. And I have to let you know how special it is that you get to see him work. He's from the island of Murano. He comes from a family of glass makers. And as a very young boy, he got to go into his family's glass factory and begin working with the material. So we're talking about decades of experience. Learning to blow glass, it's a lot like learning to play a musical instrument that, comes down to the hours of practice that you put in. The younger you start, the more of an advantage you might have. better that your instructors, the glass makers that you're exposed to. That can also be an incredible influence, give you a great advantage, but it just comes down to the hours that you put in yourself, the amount of practice that you have. Now I saw something pretty slick there. I saw a few people kind of react to it. Did you guys see him touch the glass? Did anyone just kind of have a little heart pitter-patter? I did too, and I've been blowing glass for 12 years, and that still makes me nervous as well. You can do that once. So what's going on there is we've got oil in our skin, and if you very quickly touch the surface of the glass, we're not talking about lingering, we're not talking about grabbing it, but we're talking about just kind of whipping your hand across the surface. You can do that once. And then there's no more oil in that part of your hand. So if you do it a second time, it's going to be a bad time. Also, just as a general disclaimer, and for everyone listening to the webcast, don't ever do it. But if you're a Davide and you see it happen, that's just physically what's going on. He has eliminated oil on his skin for that brief moment that he touched the glass. Now, I did not come from a family of glass makers. I grew up in Ohio, where my mom is a nurse and my dad is an insurance agent. So they are still scratching their head about how I ended up here. And when they came and watched a hot glass show and they saw me blowing glass, I could just feel their parental fear wafting over me. They were just not comfortable. And I didn't even touch the glass, but they wanted me to be wearing a full fireman's uniform, definitely 2 big Kevlar mittens at all time, a helmet for good measure. And I was also blowing glass on a cruise ship at the time, so I think my dad would have been happy if I was also wearing a life preserver. So, believe it or not, those aren't necessary. We need to have bare hands. If we're trying to do this wearing oven mitts or protective gloves, we wouldn't have the dexterity and control that you need to turn the pipe. We really feel for the nuance of movement in the glass, and we have to react to it and respond to it to turn the pipe. If you're trying to do that with gloves, it would be like trying to play the guitar with gloves on. You would do a terrible job. Further, that can actually make you less safe. Oh yeah, we've got another gather going on over there. And so he actually gathered that out of a different melting furnace. So we've got a furnace in the far corner of our stage, and that actually contains a beautiful blue-colored glass inside. You can see the beautiful blue color? No, it looks bright orange, just like the other bubble. But that's because it's 2,000 degrees. When that comes down to room temperature, it's going to be very similar to the blue that you see in these 3 pieces here. So it's a combination of cobalt and cobalt, which makes a kind of a royal navy blue, and turquoise made from copper blue. And so that's going to be the other part of our Encalmo design. All right, so as he's shaping this glass, this time we've switched from the wooden blocks, we've switched from the marburing table, and we're using one of my favorite tools, that pad. Does anyone know what that pad is made from? Nobody wants to guess? Give you a hint, it's a very special local material. Oh wait, no, not this one. I thought this was a folded up wet newspaper, but this is actually a graphite fiber pad. And so there's a folded up wet newspaper inside that little sleeve. But very similar to the wooden block that's using steam. So the glass just glides on steam. All that heat and steam is rising away from your skin. So it's very comfortable to hold. All right, we've got a great view of Jeff Mack over there reheating one of our Encalmo cups. Now, a really important step is happening right now where we're squeezing down a constriction line between the bubble and the pipe. So scoring this line down into the glass. And the tool that he's using to do that is called jacks. And so I'm a glass expert, but I'm also a chocolate expert. Are there any chocolate experts out there? Quite a few of you. Excellent. So if you have a chocolate bar, you might know about those nice lines in it that help you break it apart. Well, some people practice portion control, some people share. I just find it really satisfying to break my chocolate bars apart in nice straight lines. Well, similarly, with our glass, if we have a nice straight, well-defined constriction line, we'll be able to break the glass with a great deal of precision. So that's what this mark is all about. So now we're moving on, heating up the tip of this bubble. And so this is going to be where we create an opening and make this look like more of a cup. So it's going to look like a cup that's attached to the blowpipe. Poke a hole down here. And this is going to be 1/2 or hemisphere of our bubble. And so we got that nice and hot. He's poking with the tweezers and then releasing. So it just pulls apart, kind of working his way down into the glass. Now, as the tips of those tweezers heat up, they tend to stick a little bit. Hot glass wants to stick to other things that are hot, but a little bit of wrestling and looks like we've broken all the way through. Nicely done. So you guys are a quiet crowd. I'm just going to let you know that at any point, if you want to ooh, ah, or applaud when you see something you like, you're very welcome to do that. It's hard for me to not applaud when I see the bubble get opened up. I'm pretty thrilled with this. Now, where he picked it apart with the tweezers, that left some tool marks behind. So we've got a little bit of a deckled edge. And so our next step, I think we're going to be addressing that and cleaning that up a little bit. So, giving it a good heat. We'll see what tool he reaches for next. Now, is anyone wondering how we have oh, you've got a question. Eventually, both of these will come together, absolutely. Then you'll be clapping. Oh, so you're just holding out. You're waiting for the really exciting parts. All right, well, I'm going to be looking at you when we join the cups together. It is. It absolutely will be. And so Jeff is giving this just the right amount of heat. And if you see the, kind of gradation of the glow, you can tell that all that heat is concentrated on the lip or the opening of that bubble. We want it to be a little bit more stable back where it's attached to the pipe. And the section that we want to shape and smooth and stretch open needs to be much, much hotter. Now look how he's using the jacks this time. He inserted them into the mouth of the bubble. As he's turning, he's stretching from the inside. He's applying pressure as he's turning from the outside. That tool is like a Swiss Army knife. You can use it so many different ways. This was also the tool that we used to squeeze that constriction line. Good photo op there too when we ignite the paddle. So we were using the wooden board to make sure that the level of that lip or opening was perfectly smooth and flush. All right, so I think Jeff is going to be back on track to kind of babysit our blue bubble over here. He's going to just keep it at a consistent temperature, keep it at a consistent shape, and we're going to open up the tip of this bubble to match the first one. Eventually, these two pieces of glass are going to come together. And so another thing that I love to see is we've got a good section of hecklers right down here in the front row. And so, oh, see, and then I see the maestro stand up, and again, my heart pitter-patters. Normally I encourage a lot of heckling, but I'm kind of awestruck here tonight, so I'll leave it to you folks. Yeah, so we've got all of the students who have been working hard with Davide all week long over at our studio. So it's been here for a week teaching. And if you're liking what you're seeing and you want an opportunity to work with him yourself, if you are a glassblower with a couple years of experience, actually he's coming back again in February. So there'll be another class taught by Davide covering these awesome Muranese techniques. Okay, so here we go. Shaping with this graphite pad, the steam pad. And starting to pick open the tip of that bubble. And so that's how we're going to address all of that clear glass on the very tip. It's going to get eliminated here. And that was a great amount of heat. So kudos to Marco there for heating up the tip of that bubble. They could pick that right open. Oh, they like that. And so I just want to say, don't forget Davide sitting at the bench. He was holding the tools. So his role, he's called the gaffer. And so that is a kind of a title of honor, maestro, I should say, yes, depending on what part of the world you're from, either the maestro or the gaffer. But, he's like the foreman on our construction site or the conductor of the orchestra here. He's controlling all of these moving parts. Anytime he gives an instructions, it's up to this entire team to do what he asks to help him execute this piece of glass. It's a beautiful job shaping there.
My earliest glassmaking teams were big, huge groups of people making crazy stuff, and this was my first job, but I wore a camera, and I always...
And so one of the goals that we're trying to achieve as he starts to open up the second half of our Encalmo piece is to make sure that the circumference of that opening is going to perfectly match the circumference of the opening of the blue bubble. These two pieces of glass are going to have to come together just perfectly. We want them to have the same wall thickness. We want them to have the same circumference so that we can make a seamless transition. So he's got a pair of calipers. But this move, we're going to maybe do a little bit of a price check too. All right. So now that they've moved the blue bubble back to Davide's bench, Mark over here, it's his job to babysit. Just maintain that shape. He can't let it get too hot. If he were to overheat it a little bit as he's rotating, centrifugal force could change the scale of that opening. If he lets it get a little bit too cold, that's even worse because the glass could crack and break. So he's going to be working within kind of a narrow margin of error where it can't heat up too much, it can't cool down too much. Just doing that very important job of babysitting the glass while the next piece gets sized up to match the first. Now, another thing that I want to point out tonight, we've got our team of glass blowers who work here at the museum in Corning. We have the team who are visiting here from Muranese, and not everybody has English as a common language. And so I'm seeing more gestures than I would normally. I'm seeing more pointing and hearing more whistling. But it's, glass is very universal. Once you know how to work the material, it's amazing how, you can work with people who don't even speak a common language. All right, so at this point, both Marco and Jeff are heating up the lips of the cups that they're working on. We want to make sure that there's some stability back where the glass is attached to the blowpipes, but then they're nice and hot right at those openings. And here we go, attaching them together. And I am looking at you, sir. Where's the oohs and ahs? Beautiful. So if you were watching glass for the first time, this is, we've got the wave going on too. I hope that this reaction is telling you how special that Encalmo connection was, because it could go so terribly wrong. If you're watching beginners try and align Encalmo cups, they'll very often miss, right? And so if you had misaligned those two hemispheres, if you didn't have that perfect seam, you could have a gap where air is escaping, and then you'd have to try and force and smush that back into something nice and round and seamless, in which case you might have an overlap of color or an overlap of that color design. But here we are going to end up with an absolutely beautiful transition from that Muranese pattern to the blue half of our bubble. All right, so back to the Marver. And so this is some heavy work. Now, you see him rolling that glass back and forth, and you might think, I could roll, a bowling ball back and forth. That's no big deal. It's a big deal. Every time he changes directions, he can't let it stop in one place for, even a moment. If he does, then you'll end up with a flat spot. And so even to change directions on the Marver as you're rolling that glass back and forth, it involves this pretty sophisticated, kind of lifting and turning motion. Now, for the first few years that I was blowing glass, I could only marver in one direction. I couldn't get that kind of flick and lift and turn over. And so I was like a typewriter. I'd roll to one end of the marver, and then I'd have to pick the piece of glass up and then scoot back and then marver back. So it was a, pretty happy day in my glass life when I, reached the level of skill that I could marver two ways. And so when you see an object that's this big and this difficult to manage, be so beautifully shaped, you're seeing, amazing craftsmen at work. Now, one of the challenges that we are set up with here, now that we have the two halves of our Encalmo bubble brought together, is that they are going to react differently to the heat. So, that beautiful blue glass, it might have a different melting temperature than that Muranese pattern. And so one end of your bubble might want to be a lot hotter than the other end. It might want to inflate at different rates. It might cool down at different rates. So one of the reasons that colors, can behave differently is the actual metal that is included in them to give them that color, but also the way they interact with light can have a lot to do with the way that glass responds to the heat. And so if we were at the beach and I'm wearing my black t-shirt and you're wearing a white t-shirt, who's going to be hotter at the beach? I would, right? All this dark shirt is going to absorb light and heat from the sun. The white shirt would be reflecting the light and heat away, so light colors stay cooler. Well, same thing when we go into that reheating furnace. The darker colors are going to absorb that light and heat faster. The lighter colors, the opaque colors, they tend to reflect it away. And so they just respond really differently. And so there's different things we can do to kind of work against or work with those forces. When we're sitting at the bench, we might have to take special care to cool the hotter section down. We might use a torch at the bench to preheat some of the colder or more stiff sections of color. Yeah, what's your question? Really good question. You're asking if we have a glass behind the glory hole that we get that awesome view inside the furnace. And another question that I've been asked is, how much do you pay the poor cameraman inside that furnace? Another question we've been asked is, what kind of GoPro sits inside a furnace like that? And of course, there is no cameraman in the furnace. There is no camera in the furnace. It is a special piece of glass. So our camera, it's ordinary. It's even got its own little fan. Yeah. Look at that. The camera has its own little fan to help keep it cool. And it's looking through a type of glass that's called fused silica. And so fused silica was developed right here in Corning, New York by Corning Incorporated in the 1920s or 30s. And they were trying to replicate quartz. And so this type of glass melts around 4,000 degrees. Really neat invention. There was no commercial application for it. So it sat on the shelf for many decades, and then NASA came along. NASA said, we need windows for all of our space shuttles that can withstand the heat of re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. And so Corning Incorporated gave them fused silica. So, astronauts look through it. We're looking through it. I'm not saying we're better, but, we're up there. It's pretty good. And so I loved this move when Marco was reheating the glass, and he came out of that reheating furnace and held the pipe right up in the air. And so just using gravity to help kind of shorten the bubble, help round it out. You can tell a lot about the skill of a glassmaker when you can see how much shaping they do without using tools, but with heat and gravity and centrifugal force. But I think that's also just a pretty impressive gun show, because again, that piece of glass is really heavy, right? There's a misconception that a glassblower's superpower is their lung capacity. You think they must have an amazing lung capacity to blow glass. I'm probably using more air than any of these guys with the amount of chit-chatting that I'm doing. To inflate the glass, we're talking about a pound or two of air pressure. So like blowing out a birthday candle to inflate the glass right here. But I certainly don't want to give you the idea that they don't have superpowers. They do. It just happens to be the Popeye forearms, the muscles that it takes to turn this glass, to manage this weight while it's moving and shifting. It's really significant. All right, so Carl jumping in to help take a heat. So again, when you were asking about the number of people on our team here, and is that always necessary? Well, it's not always necessary, but it's certainly really helpful. When you can take turns lifting and flashing and reheating this piece of glass, it's going to take some of the pressure off, give you a chance to rest up. All right, so back to that steam pad. So he's going in with a pair of tweezers here, starting to pull that. And I think we're going to bring that opening down to a close. Davide was telling me a little bit earlier about the shape that he wants to make in the design. And so we have this two-part encalmo, but I believe we're going to be switching the axis, which means we're going to be kind of creating a hole somewhere else in the vase where we'll attach a blowpipe there and close the bubble where it's open right now. And that'll change, kind of where that hemisphere or that equator is in our bubble, the orientation of that division of color. And so I'm very confident that Davide has a really clear idea of the design in his mind that he wants to execute. But, as he was explaining it to me, we had Marco helping to kind of translate and explain it a little bit, and some of my more specific questions like, what size? Big, okay. We didn't get a lot of details, so I'm pretty excited to see this get unrolled here. So we're using one of our torches to selectively heat the glass that's really close to the pipe there, and using a torch is so helpful. If we were trying to heat that section of glass to make it soft so that we could add a constriction line, and using the heat from the furnace to do that, we'd have to get the entire piece of glass so hot that it was all really soft and moving around and wiggling. It would be really heavy, really difficult to control. But if we can get that heat introduced by using a torch here at the bench, that's going to make it much more manageable. All right, now, looks like Marco over there has picked up a blowpipe. He's got a nice sized mass of clear glass on the end of his blowpipe. And I think he's going to be making a collar out of that. So he's blowing air through the pipe while he's inside the reheating furnace, and that's going to cause the glass on the end to kind of pop open. And so he'll be able to shape that now into a collar. He'll be able to blow air all the way through. And that's how we're going to be able to switch the axis on our bubble that Davide is working with. So there you go, shaping up that collar. So do we have other questions? It's a great crowd here tonight. If you are just joining us or if you came in a little bit late, Davide Salvadore is our gaffer. He's visiting us from Muranese, Italy. We get shouts and praise every time I mention his name. But he's here teaching a class at the studio at the Corning Museum of Glass. So it's a class that focuses on making these beautiful Muranese patterns, these colorful patterns in glass, on pulling and creating the Muranese, on pulling and creating cane and incorporating those into your artwork. He's been teaching a class all week long here, and if it's something that you are interested in, we have him coming back to the museum in February. So this class will be taking place again during our winter session. You can find information about our classes and how to register on our website, cmog.org. Now, to take Davide's class, you need 2 years of glass blowing experience. So if you are watching it for the first time, maybe 2 years from now, you can come back and take his class. But there are opportunities for you. We have something called the Make Your Own Walk-In Workshop, where you can head across the parking lot to the studio, work with some trained professionals, and make a glass project of your own. We'll give you the right amount of protective gear and instruction and help. You can make an ornament, a flower, a wind chime. Oh, all right, so we are attaching that collar right on to our blue glass here. All right, so they gave that a good heat, making sure that that's fully fused. Even using the compressed air to kind of cool and stabilize that glass. And you can really see by the glow of the material where it's the hottest. And same way you blow on your food, we blow on the glass with that compressed air to chill it. All right, so when Marco feels like he has the right amount of stability, Davide begins chilling the glass at the opposite end. Pouring water on it creates thermal shock. And thermal shock that you're familiar with is if you've poured room temperature soda over ice cubes and seen how that sudden temperature change makes them crack. Well, here, that's causing the glass to crack. So good vibration. Perfect break. Beautiful. Nicely done. And so you guys are really well trained. I like the level of enthusiasm when you see those transfers take place because so many things could go wrong, right? If the temperature isn't, the glass always wants to break where the diameter is the smallest or the temperature is the coldest. And so, making those constriction lines, pouring that water along the line really helps to achieve that. But if it was cold somewhere else, that crack could have traveled. Might have, instead of sticking right to that perfect constriction line, travel down into the beautiful pattern bubble. But something tells me you're not going to see things like that happen tonight. Now, if you're watching a beginner glass blower, they might have a 50% success rate of just getting through that punty transfer. So, that's not a 50% success rate of making an awesome, beautiful piece of work. No, if they're getting halfway done, they're doing a good job. But we really do have an awesome treat tonight to get to see this much talent in our amphitheater. So on our reheating furnace, you can see we've got these concentric sets of doors. So the piece of glass gets larger and larger. We can open them wider and wider. But can you feel the heat as we open up those doors? Yeah, those of you in the first row out here could definitely feel it. We call this the splash zone. Kidding, but you definitely feel the warmth of the furnace. Well, so can poor Marco and Carl over there, so can Davide. So we try and keep them shut as much as possible. But one of the challenges is that if you were to accidentally tag or touch the sides of those doors as you're moving your glass piece in and out, one of two terrible things would happen because hot glass wants to stick to other things that are hot. So depending on the temperature of your object, the glass will either pull out a chunk of brick into it. It looks like ugly little crumbs of white brick that would get stuck to the surface of your piece. Or if your piece of glass was really hot, you could leave kind of a string or a goober of glass behind on your furnace door. So, oh, look at this. We are plugging up the opening. I didn't see that coming. Yeah, that's a good bravo as well. So he forced that clear glass into the opening, completely sealed it up, cut it free from the steel with a pair of shears, and he got that nice and smooth again. Now we are back to a round or an enclosed bubble, and we can round it out and change the shape. So often when I'm describing our glass making process up here, I know what they're making, I know what's coming next. Right now I feel like a live sports commentator. I feel like on that move we could have said goal. Yeah, what's your question? Why did they plug it up? Well, if they wanted to inflate that glass, they'd have a real hard time if they didn't enclose the bubble. So they're going to make this even bigger. Oh, yeah. Yeah. You thought it was done? Oh, yeah. Well, we're going to make it bigger. Yeah. All right. Now this is a tremendous piece of glass. Marvering that, shaping it.
What's the worst thing they could happen? In front of 250 people. Of course, on Facebook, they'd say in front of 5,000 people at the corner museum.
Now, we have a gaffer that we work with named Bob, and Bob uses a marble marver back at his studio at home. And it's kind of like a trick marver because he's the only one who can use this. His marble marver had quartz deposits, and where they had rolled hot glass over it, the quartz had exploded out. So his marver is very, very pitted. And so when he used his marver, when he would roll glass on the surface, he had to steer around all the little pits in the surface. So he was the only one who knew exactly how to kind of maneuver and work his way around that. And so whenever I see someone marvering, I tend to think of Bob and his marble marver. But That steel surface is one of the technological advances that we're really happy about. And so another thing that that hot glass did that we kind of plugged into the opening there was it really quickly heated up that glass. And so now as we start to draw this down to a nice constriction, not only are we going to have to not heat up the pattern and not waste any of that pattern, that really helps bring it to a nice close. All right, now trimming through that extra mass. I was using a pair of shears to do that are called diamond shears. And when you cut through glass, they're not called diamond shears because there are special diamonds in the blades or anything like that. They're called diamond shears because of the shape. I'll actually grab a pair so I can show you. But the diamond shears blades are bent. Beg your pardon, I'm just going to come right through. And so you can see when I squeeze these together, how they kind of make that nice little aperture. And so when you cut through the glass using this tool, it pulls the glass to a nice point. If you do the same thing with straight shears, it leaves kind of a line behind in the glass. That would be a cold, straight line. But when you want the tip of your bubble to be nice and round, using this tool is a really great choice. But you can cut through glass with regular tin snips. Does anyone sew or quilt out there? A few of you? So when I am using my nice sewing shears, it's really important that you only use them on fabric. You're very protective of them. Well, we have a gorgeous pair of sewing shears that they use to cut through the hot glass. So I'm a little bit appalled, but it still does the job. Another difference, though, between glass shears that are specifically made for this purpose and shears that you might find at home is this little bit of extra space between the hinge and where your fingers are. Just a little bit of buffer room, just to give your fingers a little bit more space, a little bit of distance between the extremely hot glass and your skin. But as we do some of these trims, we've got great assistants up there who are holding wooden boards between the gaffer's hands and the glass, just to help deflect that a little bit. So we were inflating the bubble just a little bit right now, and it wasn't Davide who was blowing up the bubble, it was Sam. So if you were to inflate the glass yourself while you're holding onto the pipe, you've got a terrible view of how that shape is changing. It's like looking down the length of a 5-foot-long drinking straw, and unless you've got go-go gadget arms, you can't simultaneously shape and tool the glass. So with Davide sitting at the bench, he's looking at the glass, he's shaping the glass, he can be cooling the glass and asking the assistant to inflate for him. He tells when to start blowing, when to stop, how much air pressure he needs. That just gives you great control. The danger is actually to overinflate the glass. Glass likes to expand. Very little air pressure is required. It does not like to contract. So if you were to blow too hard and make that bubble too thin, it's really almost impossible to shrink it back down. All right, so we made a little post where we gathered glass out of the melting furnace. We shaped it up and cooled it down. We stuck that to the very tip of the bubble, now pulling and stretching, bringing that out to a further point. And I think our objective here might be to close that down even tighter, to eliminate more of that clear glass, to not waste any of the color pattern. So you can see it left behind a little bit of that clear glass, and just smack that right off the tip there. You like that move. And so we actually used another one of our favorite tools to do that karate chop, where they whacked off the little bit of glass on the tip. So let me see if I can grab another example of the tool they used here. It's called a taglio, this one right here. Now, Normally when I start explaining some of the meaning of our different Italian terms, there aren't so many Italians in the room, so this is kind of nervous for me, but I'm pretty sure that taglio in Italian means $300 spatula. But really effective tool. They were able to just break that bit of clear glass away. And so even as American glassblowers, when we use these Italian terms, it's because of the kind of long tradition of teaching that the Italian maestros have brought to the American studio crafts movement. On the island of Murano, this is a glass industry that has been around for centuries. I think I heard something like 175 generations of glass blowers. So just absolutely incredible history there. And for a long time, for a majority of that history, the glass techniques and skills, they were closely guarded secrets. Oh, they like that too. Just makes it look easy. But, one of our favorite things, though, is when fantastic maestros like Davide get to come over to the United States and they share those secrets, they share those techniques, they teach these classes. And this is something that he has done for many years all over the country. So not only here in Corning, New York, but teaching out at Pilchuck in Washington State, at Penland. I know he's taught in Istanbul as well, and I'm really excited that next week he's going to be teaching at my alma mater, the Columbus College of Art and Design in Columbus, Ohio. So pretty excited about that too. We've got a good contingent of Columbus glass blowers here tonight. But yeah, it was a kind of a big culture shift when these glass blowers started sharing their secrets, when the glass community kind of opened up and became a worldwide community. And I think that's something that Corning is really happy to participate in and facilitate. All right. And so one thing that I should mention here with the color patterns that we're looking at tonight, you are only going to be seeing them today between 1 and 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And so at those temperatures, they appear drastically different. Now, I already described the blue section of our bubble as being very similar to these colors here. Well, you're seeing it and it's looking bright orange for the most part. I'm not even sure what the color in our Muranese roll-up is. Besides the white, everything else will look drastically different above 1,000 degrees than it will when it's completely cooled down tomorrow. Did you guys see him flip his little graphite pad in his hand? Just a little tool flip. Too cool. This is so exciting for me. So Jeff going for a reheat. Doing a great job, but with maybe less style points. We can still applaud him, yeah. The hecklers are ready to go there. Yes, the super fans, I should say. What is he going to do now? So early in the process, he did tell me that they were going to be switching the axis, but I think we're going to do more shaping and inflating first. So it looks like we're having Marco get ready to size up some blowpipes and decide what he wants to use. So at some point here, when they're happy with the shape, we're going to create a hole in this piece of glass, probably somewhere along that kind of equator, that division of color. We'll make a hole right there and we'll attach a blowpipe. Then we'll have to close up the hole where it comes away from the initial pipe, similar to the way we just closed off the end of the Muranese. Use lots of paddling, we'll use cork paddles mostly to shape that, round it back up, and then inflate it into a vase from there. So, but the amount of time I just took to explain to you what I think is about to happen is more time than was given to me when I was asking what the game plan is for tonight. So, we'll see this revealed. Oh, we're flattening it using the cork paddles. So as we kind of flatten and smooth this glass, we're also capping air pressure inside the pipe, that as we're squeezing this down, you could actually squish the bubble. And so by trapping the air pressure inside, that prevents that from happening. And there's two types of glass blowers in the world. Glass blowers that love the smell of burning cork and glass blowers that hate the smell of burning cork. I tend to love it. I think it's really beautiful. Reminds me of a campfire. Some people really don't care for it. I guess everyone up there on the mezzanine is getting intimately acquainted with the smell of burning cork. Now, I would say there's a smell that is universally hated in the glass studio, and that is the smell of burning tennis shoe. Sometimes you see these little bits of glass hit the floor. They're still hot. They're still, probably close to 1,000 degrees when they hit this concrete. If you step on them, they'll burn into your shoe a little bit and make a terrible, terrible smell. All right. All right, so Sam, taking a heat. And so we had some commands of up, and we didn't know if that meant the pipe goes up or the glass goes up. So this is the part where we all learn Italian. And so he's really able to sculpt some texture into this glass using those paddles. But we do have to keep flipping this back and forth. It does want to fall with gravity. And Pino over there has the important job of using the torch. So that glass that's attached to the pipe, that's the coldest section of our piece. It's the last section to go into the reheating furnace. It's the first section to come out. And if that section of glass gets close to 1,000 degrees, it could crack and break and compromise the entire vase. And so holding that torch against it is a little bit of an insurance policy. When the tip of the bubble goes into the furnace, it's going to be more likely to be a matching temperature to the glass attached to the pipe because of this move. All right, now Marco over here, he's at the melting furnace. He's going to gather again onto this collar. So again, dipping the pipe into that furnace, turning in one direction. There's a few things that can influence the amount of material that you gather. One is the size of your pipe, the diameter of that steel. Having more surface area means you collect more glass. But other factors that can influence the amount you gather is how full the pot is. If your pot of liquid glass is filled to the brim, when you dip your pipe in, it's almost horizontal. And so coming in at that angle, it's very easy to lift out that liquid. If it's the end of the week and your glass has been worked down and it's not as full, you go in more at more of a steep angle. So then as you lift the glass out, there's more likely to drip off the end. So that can affect the quantity. But other factors, is the rate that you're turning, the precise temperature of the glass inside. If it's a little bit hotter, it's a little bit runnier. If it's a little bit colder, it's a little thicker. So working in a new studio, these can all be, variables that you're not as familiar with. But we've got a nice big collar on the end of that pipe. He blew air through the end of it, so he broke through the tip. Now he's forming that up into a nice ring. So good helpers when you want to, flash that entire piece of glass to have them close the furnace doors behind you, not only to help deflect the heat from the person standing at the furnace warming it up, but also to kind of reflect the heat back onto that glass attached to the pipe. So at this heat, because the tip of the bubble is quite a bit hotter, gravity is, helping to change that shape. It's just stretching it out a little bit. And as he's using the cork paddles, Pino over there was using the compressed air gun to kind of direct some of the smoke away from his face. So pretty helpful there. And it looks like he's really pinching in some contours into that bubble using these big steel tweezers. So good communication happening, letting him know when to inflate, when to turn the pipe, and when he's ready for it to be reheated. So everyone here on the team, our role is to do whatever Davide needs to help execute the piece that he wants to make tonight. All right, so he's asked Marco to come over with that collar of glass. All right, and so again, we're going to see one of these transfers. We want to cool off the connection point. While we wait for Marco's collar to stabilize, we're going to chill the constriction line between the blue bubble and Davide's pipe. Now you want to make sure you have enough stability there. Otherwise, with all the weight of this piece of glass, it could just flip-flop and wiggle out of control. So compressed air is bringing the temperature down just right. In the meantime, these drips of water creating thermal shock. But timing is everything here. This is always the part of the process that makes my heart pitter-patter. Here we go, up onto the bench rail. Nice break, beautiful transfer. And then quickly right into that reheating furnace. Nicely done. And so when it goes into the hole at this point, we always still kind of hold our breath. We keep an eye on the glass, and we listen, too, to hear any pings. If you hear there's kind of scary noises that the glass could make if that crack did want to travel. When it was reintroduced to the extremely hot heat of the furnace, that's when it would happen. By the time it makes it through that full first flash right here, it's a great relief. When I was learning to blow glass, it was very, very common that the piece would just hit the floor, and common for every single person who's learning. When you're a beginner, when your assistant is a beginner, you often get those temperature relationships wrong. All right, so we've got a gas cart over here that we've got our torches attached to. It looks like we're moving those around a little bit to help with our reach and where we want to work the glass. Kind of creating a new workstation. Now, as we're reheating the glass, it's really great for us with these nice blue colors with this Muranese pattern, because you can see the glow in the material that tells you what section is the hottest. But that's not a reliable variable for our team up here. Depending on the time of day, whether we've got a sunny studio or a cloudy afternoon or a nighttime show versus a morning show, the sunlight flooding the room will wash out the glow of the glass. So you could make the same piece in the morning as you would in the evening, and it would look very, very different. Other factors that change the appearance of the glass is the color. A blue transparent glass looks very different than orange or white glass. And so even when we see the glow, that's not what Marco is using to tell the heat right now. He's using the movement in the material. As he's standing there at the furnace getting it hot, you might be able to see in your camera angle when it starts to wiggle and fall with gravity, but he's feeling for the movement. He's feeling for the glass to soften. Feels like a little bit of drag as he's turning. But it really comes down to having a lot of skill and experience, a lot of practice to know the glass so well. So with this great big piece of glass and wanting to open up so many of our furnace doors, we've also got a really fantastic heat shield up there. It's going to help protect his hands. You know, glass blowers do have nerve endings. All right. So I suspect that the blue glass we're working with is probably quite a bit hotter than the patterned glass. And again, not just because that was the first section that went into the reheating furnace, but because it's just a softer temperature. It behaves a little bit differently. So he's biting into that with a pair of shears. He's creating two openings, or what could be two necks on our vessel. And so where he cut into the glass, you know, initially that would leave a hard, sharp line, you know, where the steel bit through it, you know, like sharp enough that it could actually cut you. But going in immediately and polishing it, using that torch, is going to soften it. And so he can really quickly and drastically change the texture there. Drove the heat up even further. And cutting. Did you guys see how he really had to wrench the shears out just now? Well, the shears, you know, as they are touching that extremely hot glass, the metal itself, that will heat up, and that might make it want to stick in the hot glass. But also, where the shears bite in, they cool the glass immediately, so the glass gets hard right there. So it could either be the shears sticking to the glass or the glass just freezing up around the shears. But either way, you know, you really quickly kind of worked to wiggle and wrench the tool free. He's got that bucket of water. He's dumping his hands in the bucket there. He's got a sleeve on his right arm, just from kind of elbow to wrist there, and that is something really common. You know, a lot of the gaffers here tonight wear them. Anytime I'm sitting at the bench, I make sure to wear a sleeve. But you know, that's the hand that is tooling the glass. That's the hand that's usually in the closest proximity to the material. And so if you are working a large-scale piece of glass or you are working over a long period of time, it's pretty common that you might get blistering or a heat rash on this part of your skin. And it's not from being clumsy and accidentally touching any hot glass or touching any hot tools, but just that exposure. So the sleeve would be made of Nomax, similar to a mechanic sleeve. Just that extra layer of protection. Another thing that tends to surprise people is that sometimes if a gaffer wants to be more comfortable around the heat, they'll put on more layers of clothing. And it can actually make you cooler. You have more barriers between that heat that's radiating off of the glass and your skin. All right, now we have really warmed up these two necks or openings here. Start to stretch and elongate them. So you can see how much of a moving target it is as they want to fall with gravity. He's working pretty hard to communicate with Marco about when to flip the piece back and forth, switching from one neck to another, stretching and elongating it. And so you can imagine how challenging this is to heat. You know, that as if you want one of these openings to be hot enough to stretch and change, the other one is also going to be hot and stretching and moving. And just the nature of rotating the piece means you can't keep a tool on both openings at the same time. So you can see when they start to wiggle and fall with gravity, you know, we're kind of creating two extremities in this glass. And so they're going to want to move apart with centrifugal force. It's very likely that they would want to fall together and stick. And so the rate that they're turning, coupled with the heat, is really important to get that right, so you don't let it get out of control. It's kind of like two wet spaghetti noodles side by side. I'm struggling a little bit to come up with analogies of what this glass is like to work with, and it's just such a foreign material if you haven't had a chance to play with it before. You know, I went to school for painting, and you know, that was really a primary language for me. I probably started painting when I was about 2 years old, started stealing my big sister's crayons and writing on a wall. You know, that was my first introduction to art making on that type of surface. When I started blowing glass, I was in my 20s. I was in college, and it was like being 2 years old all over again, though, because there was nothing in my life that had prepared me up to that point for working with this medium. So another one of those amazing moves, breaking the glass with his hand. A little bit of the Davide karate chop. We like that. So, you know, maybe if I blow glass for another, 30 years like Davide, then I'll be brave enough to karate chop the glass. But I don't see it happening just yet. And so usually, when we're describing a blown glass vessel, we can describe it the way we describe a body that, depending on the shape of vase, would typically have a mouth or a lip at the very top. That's the opening. You can have a neck, a shoulder, a waist, and a foot. But I think we are making a vessel that has two necks. So two different openings. And so as he's, breaking the glass here, every time he pulls on it with the metal shears, they are leaving marks behind. And when he kind of chops it or breaks it away, he's left with a very clean lip on the opening. But, another kind of element that you want to consider is every time you apply that stress to the glass to break that tip off at the very front, if you want to break off that tool marked area of glass, you're introducing a vibration into the entire object. Yeah. And so if your connection to the pipe at the opposite end, if that is a little bit weak, that vibration at the very front, the very tip of the piece could be enough to upset it at the bottom and make it fall onto the floor. So all the temperature relationships are so important. But again, with this much experience on the floor, they know exactly how far they can push the glass. Now you can see how we're working with gravity and against gravity, how we're working with and against centrifugal force, making sure that this piece is safe. And this is where we get to see kind of the finishing of the design process, really deciding how he wants to contour these two necks, the composition that he wants to see in the finished work of art. Now, these are the finishing stages. The thinner these necks become, the longer and thinner, the more precarious the glass is to deal with. That it cools down rapidly when it's thin. It becomes brittle and ready to crack. It heats up rapidly when you're flashing it in the reheating furnace. So we're nearing the finishing stage here. Another reason I can tell that we are nearing the finish line is because Chris Rochelle over there has put on his favorite outfit, his big silver suit. He's about to put on his great big space helmet, because Chris is going to have the job of catching this piece of glass when they free it from the steel. So it would be amazing if we could set this out on the table when Davide is finished. Everyone could come up and take a selfie with it. That's not going to happen because at that temperature, the glass will be about 1,000 degrees. And if we let it cool down in this ambient temperature, within about 5 to 10 minutes, it would break apart. It would cool too quickly. The thick spots would cool and shrink more slowly than the thin parts. So the glass would be cooling and shrinking at uneven rates. It would literally just rip itself apart. So what Chris is going to do is he's going to catch this vase at about 1,000 degrees and load it into an annealing oven. Then this piece of glass is probably going to spend about 16 hours reaching room temperature. Now that slow cool down is going to let the thick spots and the thin spots shrink together, relieve the stress and tension from the glass. And it'll be the pretty happy afternoon tomorrow when we get to look at it. Yeah, where's he going to take it to? To the annealing oven. So where Jeff is standing, on the very far left side of the stage, holding onto that cabinet door, inside that cabinet, it's 905 degrees. That is an oven. Yeah. And so inside the oven, we actually have laid down a blanket, something called frax. It's kind of like a glass duvet, but we can gently set the vase on its side, laying on that squishy blanket. And this piece is going to need a little bit of cold working. So the glass that's attached to the very bottom, that's going to get cut and polished away, ground nice and flat and smooth. So it might not be on display tomorrow afternoon, but we'll get it out of the oven about that time. But what do you think? Absolutely stunning. So that's Marco showing off. We hear the bravo. So a little drip of water right at this connection point, introducing some thermal shock, getting that ready to break. Chris is ready to catch it if it comes off early. And so as they drip this water onto the vase, so careful not to let any of the drips actually touch the body of the piece itself. Careful not even to sweat on the vase at this point, because that little drop of sweat could check or break the glass. But here we go. Getting ready, got a good grip on it. Vibration, perfect break. Quickly loading it into that oven. Gently setting it down. Getting Chris out of there. Absolutely fantastic. A huge round of applause, please, for your gaffer, Davide Salvadore. And so again, a huge thank you to his amazing team. We've got Sam over there, Marco doing all of that heavy lifting. Got Jamie, Chris, Jeff, and Carl. We also helped out tonight by Pietro, Pino, Roberto. And the maestro himself, Davide.